"Mom, what are you doing here?" My son, Michael's voice cut through the elegant ballroom like ice. "You weren't on the guest list." I stood frozen in my carefully chosen navy dress, clutching the small gift box containing the pearl earrings my mother had worn at her own wedding. 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, including those of my new daughter-in-law, Victoria, who didn't bother to hide her satisfied smirk. "Security will escort you out," Michael continued, his voice flat. "This is a private event." I wasn't confused. I was betrayed. Has your child ever publicly humiliated you? Have you experienced being unwelcome at an event that should have been a family celebration? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to know which city you're listening from, and if anything like this has happened to you. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this to you. My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 65 years old, and until that moment, I believed I understood the concept of betrayal. I was wrong. For 40 years, I had been a devoted mother. When my husband Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack when Michael was only 10, I had raised our son alone, working 2 jobs to ensure he could attend good schools and have every opportunity. I had sacrificed dating, travel, and career advancement to be present for his soccer games, science fairs, and college applications. When Michael brought Victoria home 3 years ago, I had welcomed her with open arms. I had hosted dinners, remembered her birthdays, listened to her complaints about her own mother, whom she described as controlling and impossible. When they announced their engagement 6 months ago, I had offered to help with the planning, only to be told they wanted to handle everything themselves. Still, I had respected their independence, asking only occasional questions about the venue, the date, and what I might wear to complement the wedding colors. "We'll let you know all the details soon," Michael had said every time I asked. "Victoria's parents are handling most of the arrangements." 2 weeks before what I thought was the wedding date, I called Michael to confirm. "Actually, Mom, we've moved the date up a bit," he said, his voice oddly distant. "Victoria's family had some scheduling conflicts. I'll email you the new information." That email never came, but 3 days ago my neighbor Helen showed me a social media post from Victoria's sister, "Final countdown to the wedding of the year, 4 days to go." I had called Michael immediately. His phone went to voicemail. I called Victoria, same result. I even called Michael's best friend from college, who awkwardly admitted he'd received his invitation weeks ago. So here I stood, having driven 2 hours to the venue listed in the social media post, wearing my new dress, holding my gift, and being treated like an intruder at my only son's wedding. As the security guard approached, something deep inside me changed. A lifetime of accommodation and understanding crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and raised my hand to stop him. "Before I go," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent ballroom, "I'd like to give the bride and groom their wedding gift." I walked forward, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I approached my son and Victoria, who stood rigidly by the elaborate wedding cake. "Congratulations on your special day," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my heart. I handed Michael the small velvet box. "These pearl earrings have been in our family for 4 generations. My mother wore them at her wedding, I wore them at mine, and I had hoped to see them worn today." Michael's face flushed. Victoria's expression remained cold. "There's one more thing," I continued, reaching into my purse. I withdrew an envelope. "This is a copy of the deed to the house you're planning to move into next month." Now I had everyone's attention. The house that Victoria has been excitedly planning to renovate. The house that you, Michael, told her your father left you in his will. Victoria's eyes widened. Michael went pale. "That house," I continued, "was never in your father's will. It was purchased by me 5 years after he died, using the life insurance money and my savings from working double shifts at the hospital for 15 years. A murmur swept through the crowd. "I had planned to sign it over to you as a wedding gift, but it seems my invitation was lost in the mail." With that, I tore the envelope in half, dropped the pieces at their feet, and turned to leave. "Mom, wait!" Michael called, his voice suddenly younger, almost childlike. I paused but didn't turn around. "You don't understand," he continued, Victoria thought. "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, turning to face him. "Victoria thought I wasn't good enough to be at her wedding, and you agreed." Victoria stepped forward, her wedding dress rustling. My parents paid for this entire wedding, she said coldly. They wanted a certain atmosphere. Your presence would have been a reminder of Michael's active, less fortunate beginnings. The ballroom went deadly quiet. Even Victoria's parents looked mortified. Less fortunate? I repeated, incredulous. You mean the beginnings where he was loved unconditionally, where he was taught values like gratitude and respect? Where a single mother worked herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities. I looked directly at Michael. I never thought I raised a man who would be ashamed of his mother. I turned to the stunned crowd. I apologize for interrupting. Please enjoy the celebration. As I walked toward the exit, an elderly man stepped into my path. It was Victoria's grandfather, whom I'd met once at a dinner months before. Mrs. Wilson, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, I believe there's been a terrible mistake. As the eldest member of the bride's family, I insist you stay. Any mother who has sacrificed as you have deserves a place of honor at her son's wedding. Before I could respond, Victoria's father stepped forward. Margaret, please stay. This is unacceptable. We had no idea you weren't officially invited. Victoria's mother nodded vigorously, shooting a disapproving glance at her daughter. I stood there, acutely aware of all eyes on me. Part of me wanted to walk out with whatever dignity I had left. Another part, the mother who had loved her son for 35 years, couldn't bear to miss his wedding day, even after this humiliation. I appreciate your kindness, I said to Victoria's grandfather, but I'll only stay if my son actually wants me here. All eyes turned to Michael, who looked like he might be sick. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, to my surprise, he walked over and took my hand. Mom, he said quietly, please stay. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. It wasn't the most enthusiastic invitation, but the crack in his voice told me he was beginning to realize what he had done. I nodded once and allowed him to lead me to a seat in the front row, which someone hurriedly vacated. The ceremony proceeded, though the atmosphere remained tense. Victoria's face was rigid with barely contained fury. When it came time for Michael to recite his vows, he stumbled over the words, his eyes darting between his bride and me. At the reception, I sat at a hastily arranged place at the family table. Several guests, including old family friends who seemed genuinely shocked by what had transpired, came to greet me warmly. Victoria's grandfather sat beside me for much of the evening, sharing stories of raising his own children and the challenges of watching them make their own choices as adults. Sometimes they disappoint us deeply, he said, patting my hand, but if we've raised them right, they eventually find their way back to the values we taught them. I wasn't sure if Michael would find his way back, but I appreciated the sentiment. As the evening wound down, Victoria's father approached me again. Margaret, he said, clearly uncomfortable, I want to apologize again. We were told you had declined the invitation due to health issues. Health issues? I repeated. He nodded. Victoria said you'd been having memory problems, that you got confused easily and large gatherings were difficult for you. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Not only had I been deliberately excluded, but I'd been portrayed as mentally declining to explain my absence. I managed a tight smile. As you can see, I'm in perfect health. He looked away, embarrassed. Yes, well, regarding the house. Is it really yours? Every square inch, I confirmed. I have all the documentation. He sighed heavily. They've been talking about renovations for months. Victoria's mother has already hired a designer. That's unfortunate, I said, not feeling unfortunate at all. Later that night, in my hotel room, I received a text from Michael. Can we talk tomorrow before you drive home? I replied with a simple yes, and then sat on the edge of the bed, emotionally exhausted. The evening had been a surreal mixture of public humiliation, forced reconciliation, and revelations about just how my son and his new wife had been depicting me to others. The next morning, Michael met me in the hotel lobby. He looked terrible, exhausted, pale, his new wedding suit replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. Victoria's not here, he said immediately. I wanted to talk to you alone. We sat in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant. For several minutes he said nothing, just stirred his untouched coffee. The house, he finally began. Is it really yours? Of all the things he could have opened with an apology, an explanation, a plea for forgiveness, he chose this. Yes, Michael. I bought it in 1992, 7 years after your father died. I have the deed at home in my safe. He swallowed hard. We've been telling everyone it was Dad's family home, that it was my inheritance. Why would you lie about that? I asked, genuinely curious. He looked down. Victoria liked the idea of an inherited family estate better than a house bought by a nurse. Each word felt like a slap. A nurse who is your mother, who sacrificed everything for you. I know, he said quickly. I know that, Mom. It got out of hand. Victoria's family has money. Real money. Old money. I felt inadequate. So you invented a fictional inheritance to impress them? He nodded miserably. And excluded me from your wedding because I didn't fit the narrative? Another nod. Michael, look at me, I said, waiting until he raised his eyes to mine. I have never been ashamed of who I am or what I've accomplished. I worked hard, I raised you well, and I created a good life for us. If Victoria or her family can't respect that, then they don't respect you, the real you, not this fiction you've created. It's not just Victoria, he admitted. I wanted to fit in with them, to be part of their world. At the cost of denying your own? At the cost of rejecting your mother? He had no answer for that. What did Victoria say after I left last night? I asked. Michael's expression darkened. She was furious, said I humiliated her in front of her entire family by letting you stay. We fought most of the night. She's threatening to annul the marriage. I felt a flicker of hope that he might be seeing Victoria's true colors, but I kept my expression neutral. And what do you want? I don't know, he said, running his hands through his hair. Everything's a mess. We put a deposit down on renovations for the house. We've told everyone we're moving in next month. Again, his focus was on the house, not on repairing our relationship or addressing his actions. Michael, I said, my voice firm but not unkind, the house is the least important issue here. You excluded your mother from your wedding. You let your wife spread lies about my mental health. You were embarrassed by me and the life we built together. Tears filled his eyes. I know. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened to me. It's like I got caught up in this other life, this fantasy, and I couldn't find my way back. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him since this whole ordeal began. I need time, I said finally, gathering my purse. Time to process what's happened and decide what it means for our relationship going forward. Of course, he said quickly. Take all the time you need, and the house. I'll let you know about the house, I interrupted, not wanting to discuss it further. We parted with an awkward hug that felt nothing like the warm embraces we had once shared so easily. Back home, I spent days in quiet reflection, alternating between grief for what I had lost and anger at how easily my son had discarded me. When the initial emotional storm began to subside, I found myself reaching a surprising place of clarity. 1 week after the wedding, I called my lawyer, Jonathan, who had been my friend since Thomas died and had helped me with the house purchase years ago. I need your help with something, I told him. It's about the property on Maple Street. 2 days later, I sat across from him in his office as he slid the papers toward me. Are you absolutely sure about this, Margaret? He asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded. More sure than I've been about anything in a long time. He watched as I signed the documents that would transform the house from a family home into something very different. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received another text from Michael. Mom, can we talk, please? Victoria and I need to know about the house situation. I invited him to my home the following day. When he arrived, he looked even worse than he had at the hotel, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, a man carrying the weight of his choices. Victoria didn't come? I asked, already knowing the answer. He shook his head. She's not speaking to me much these days. Her parents are pressuring her to leave me. They say I've embarrassed the family. And the house? I asked. He looked down. We can't afford to buy a place on our own. Not the kind Victoria expects. Her parents were going to help with renovations, but only if the house was ours. I see, I said. So you're hoping I'll still give you the house, even after everything that's happened. I know I don't deserve it, he said quickly, but I'm desperate, Mom. Victoria will leave me if we can't move forward with our plans. I studied him for a long moment, this son whom I had loved since before he drew his first breath, and I saw with perfect clarity that he hadn't learned anything. That he was still trapped in Victoria's world, still willing to sacrifice anything, including his relationship with me, to keep her happy. "Michael," I said gently, "I have something to show you." I handed him a folder containing photographs and documents. He opened it, his expression changing from confusion to shock as he flipped through the pages. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That's the Thomas Wilson Senior Center," I said. "Named after your father. I've donated the house to the community. It will provide meals, activities, and support services for seniors in need, particularly those who might otherwise be forgotten or cast aside by their families." The color drained from his face. You gave away the house?" "I did," I confirmed. "The donation is irrevocable. Construction begins next month to convert the space." But we had plans," he stammered. "Victoria's parents, the designer." "Yes, I heard about that from her father at the wedding," I said calmly. "Unfortunate timing." He looked up at me, devastation in his eyes. "Why would you do this? Is it to punish me?" "No, Michael. It's to honor the values your father and I tried to teach you: community, compassion, caring for those who need support. The things you seem to have forgotten in your efforts to impress Victoria and her family." "Victoria will leave me over this," he said, his voice hollow. "Then she never truly loved you," I replied. "She loved the story you created, the inheritance you invented, the fantasy you were selling. But not you, Michael. Not the real you." He put his head in his hands. "What am I supposed to do now?" "That's entirely up to you," I said. "But whatever you decide, it needs to be based on who you really are, not who you've been pretending to be." When he left that day, I knew in my heart it would be a long time before I saw him again, and I was right. Victoria did leave him, filing for annulment on the grounds that he had misrepresented himself before their marriage. Her parents bought her a condo in a different city, and according to mutual friends, she was engaged to someone new within a year, someone with a genuine family estate and pedigree. Michael sent me an email 6 months after our last meeting, a bitter message blaming me for destroying his marriage and future. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I was sorry for refusing to be hidden away like something shameful? That I regretted not giving him the house he needed to maintain his lies? The Thomas Wilson Senior Center opened a year after the wedding. I volunteer there 3 days a week, teaching art classes and coordinating social activities. The seniors who come there, many alone, some forgotten by their own children, have become a second family to me. We celebrate birthdays together, share holiday meals, support each other through health crises and personal losses. I occasionally hear about Michael through mutual friends. He moved to another state, took a job below his qualifications, seems to be struggling. Part of me will always ache for him, for what might have been. But another part, the part that grew stronger the day I stood up for myself in that ballroom, knows I did the right thing. Victoria's grandfather still calls me sometimes. He never approved of how his granddaughter and her parents treated me. "You're better off without them," he told me once. "And that senior center? Thomas would be proud. That's a legacy worth having." The irony isn't lost on me. Michael wanted so desperately to claim a family legacy that didn't exist, while I created a real one that will outlive us both. The center has already helped hundreds of seniors find community and purpose in their later years. That's something no mansion or estate could ever match. Sometimes when I'm at the center, watching elderly men and women find joy and connection in a place that might have been Michael and Victoria's home, I feel a deep sense of peace. Not because I took revenge, though I won't deny the satisfaction of knowing the house will never be theirs, but because I finally learned to value myself enough to stand up against those who would diminish me. At 65, I discovered that some betrayals can never be undone, some wounds never fully heal. But I also learned that there is power in refusing to be erased, in demanding the respect I deserve, and in creating meaning from pain. My son's wedding, where I was called an uninvited guest, became the unexpected catalyst for the most important journey of my life, the journey back to myself.